In today's Elden Ring video, we'll take a look at an updated Flame God build for endgame that takes advantage of the Fire Giant incantations that recently got some amazing buffs. This deals extremely high damage, it's great at stunning too, and it also makes use of some of the quick casting mechanics, so let's begin. Now, the build primarily focuses on the Fire Giant incantations as the main source of damage. GiantsFlame in particular remains a very strong option, and recently it also got its stamina cost reduced, but now there's going to be a lot more emphasis on the two other spells, including the Flame Fall Upon Them and Flame of the Fell God, that are now incredible to combo with. So let's start with the Flame Fall Upon Them. This has seen its damage decrease per single cast, but it did improve the performance so that it hits the enemies multiple times. In actual gameplay terms, this results in having much less spread on the spell in the mid to close range, which means you can hit the target with all of the fire projectiles. Against large hitbox enemies like bosses, for example, this now brings the damage almost on par with the GiantsFlame, but with a lot more benefits. One of them is the fact that it has a much longer reach compared to the GiantsFlame, so you can quite literally snipe enemies from the other side of the room. Of course, the incantation does tend to spread out a lot more as it travels away from your character, but I found out that even in this case, and even with the reduction in per projectile damage, it still deals very high damage for each of them, and you will usually hit a target with at least a couple of them for some really high damage since they are so large. Another major advantage over GiantsFlame is the fact that it also passes through enemies and their shields. This makes it a perfect choice when fighting against groups of enemies in tight spots or when the enemies might be blocking you. Especially against targets that normally block with weapons or shields, this has proven to be extremely effective. The final big advantage is the FP cost, which has also been decreased in 1.04, so it's now just 18 compared to the 32 the GiantsFlame needs. The other incantation we're using is the Flame of the Fell God, which had a massive buff in damage, and also the FP cost has been reduced. This has now become an integral part of this build, and it's exactly what it needed against enemies that tend to dodge a lot of these spells. Like Melania, for example, she dodges way more in the new update than in the previous ones, and you'll almost never hit her with a GiantsFlame on its own unless you distract her. Flame of the Fell God, on the other hand, only makes the enemies dodge on your initial cast, but its actual damage comes from the second fireball that activates as it reaches its target. I never found a single enemy that can dodge that as long as it's in its range, which is also rather large, so you can actually start a fight with a Fell God Flame, put it in place, let it explode. This usually makes the enemy to fall, and then you can immediately follow up to a GiantsFlame for a devastating 2 combo that will just destroy enemies' HP bars. GiantsFlame, on the other hand, is there for just straightforward damage. It's a pretty straightforward ability in itself. You throw it, it explodes, it deals massive damage, and has a pretty good poise damage too, so you can eventually stun some of the enemies if they even have enough HP to resist enough casts. Of course, the stamina reduction on it also makes it a lot more spammable, and it's definitely possible to do so with a shrouded tier, but more on that in just a little bit. Now, in terms of weapons and other items, we're making use again of 2 Giants seals, since we get the advantage of having a double buff for Fire Giant incantations. In this case, each one of them provides a 20% damage increase to these types of incantations, so 40% in total. As an offhand, we're also making use of a Misericord with a Redmane's Ash of War. This provides extra stuns in case it's needed. It's super useful against Melania's second phase, and it also fits the theme quite well, I might add. Armor wise, what you're looking at right here was just purely aesthetic. Of course, the defenses with this armor I'm using right now are very low, but it's still plenty enough in PvE. In PvP, you will want to aim for higher defense sets. In the case of this 125 plus build, you can definitely roll a full veteran armor. It's going to give you nice 75 points into poise, some nice damage absorption over there, and of course, if you have at least 25 points to 30 in endurance, you can definitely wear it, but you can also use something like a Great Jar Arsenal or Earth Tree Favor if you want more of that. And speaking of talismans, here is how it all looks. Flock's Talisman and Fire Scorpion Charm together provide a 20% more damage to these incantations, so that's really nice. If you also add a Flame Shrouded Tear, by the way, which you can find in Kaled from one of the Earth Tree enemies, you will get all of that between that and the two talismans to 45%, so that's a nice 45% damage increase for just 3 items. Finally, we're also using a Godfrey icon as a bonus 50% increase to charge spells, which in this case would affect both GiantsFlame and the Flame Fall incantations, so that's going to be quite noticeable. For the final seal, either use Earth Tree Favor +2 like I did in my case. It gives you some nice HP on top, increases that like armor weight, and of course you can also like dodge a little bit better with increase in endurance, but Marika's Source Seal can also work, though it's not going to be that great. Now in terms of actual strategy, here is what I'm using, and of course I didn't cover this yet, but there's a 2 combo between the Bestial Sling and the Black Blade for insane damage and also reducing enemies HP. On its own, the Black Blade has a very long wind up before it throws up the holy projectile, while Bestial Sling completely removes that. If you start with it and then immediately switch to the Black Blade, you will notice that it just jumps straight into throwing that projectile. So that's actually really awesome, and from this point on you can follow up maybe with a GiantsFlame or some of the other options, which will deal even more damage and feel more devastating since now the enemy's HP has been significantly reduced. Outside of that, I always like setting up encounters with a Fel God first, since this is largely undodgeable by most of the AI. So you can use that, it will throw the enemies on their back, and if it doesn't, you can just like spam them as long as you wait for that priming or activation of the second ball to happen. You can also follow up with a GiantsFlame, as I've said previously, for maximum damage, and the 2 combo on it is definitely satisfying. Against groups or larger hitbox enemies, I like switching to the Flame Fall instead. It passes through them, you can easily deal just as much damage with the GiantsFlame, but it's a little bit faster to cast, and it also takes all the other benefits that GiantsFlame has. The only thing we haven't covered on a final note are the stats. As I've said, this was 125 plus. In this case I had 130, but if you were to just stick to 125, you would sacrifice those 5 points from strength and dexterity, since this is not using any weapons. It's a pure spellcaster build, so you're going to want to switch things around to that. Everything else in terms of vigor, endurance, mind, and especially that 80 points into faith, or 75 in this case, will definitely need to stay if you want to get the best damage possible. Anyway, this is it with the build. Totally let me know down below if you are making use of any of these recently buffed incantations. As always, if you did enjoy the video, a thumbs up on it would be greatly appreciated, and if you really enjoyed it and want to show your support, also make sure you subscribe and activate that notification bell, and I'll see you guys in the next video.